Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone from the 1980s. It's season 1, episode 5. The stories in this one are called If She Dies and Ye Gods. So this is a Patreon sponsored review. Thank you to Cindy for picking this show. And unfortunately, this is not a particularly good episode of the 80s Twilight Zone. It may be the worst one so far. Which is not to say that the stories are complete disasters. They're just don't have that much They don't have that much intrigue or depth, I found. It's only 2 stories. The second story is a good bit longer than the first one. You know, instead of like a 50-50 split, it's more like a 65-35 kind of split. The first story, I think, starts off all right, and it's about this dad who is struggling with the fact that his daughter might die, and he already lost his wife a year before. And there's a little bit of an interesting kind of like him seeing some kind of ghost that might be leading them to some sort of answer. But to be honest, by the end of it, it didn't really feel like anything that happened really had much meaning other than just magical ghost things happen and it ends up saving his daughter's life from the coma. And that's pretty much it. I'll get into it obviously in a bit more detail. The second story is more of a kind of lighthearted comedic take on a yuppie from the 80s who encounters Cupid, but in an ironic twist, he ends up having to help Cupid get back with his girlfriend, a fury named Megira. So you have the yuppie trying to help Cupid patch up his love life, for reasons which again I'll get into, but that's the basic gist of the episode, or the story. So the second one especially, like very quickly, when I realized that it was about like this sort of 80s version of Cupid and this yuppie suddenly being in love with someone out of nowhere and having to deal with that and try and find Cupid again somehow to fix everything. I mean, from a premise point of view, it's just not something that excites me very much, but certainly it never really felt like it. Like, at least at the start of the story, I was thinking, oh, maybe it'll have some commentary on this type of lifestyle, and Cupid certainly brings up a bunch of things about, oh, you're into material things, you fill up your life with exercise and networking and drinking and buying lush things, but it's kind of hollow. But to be honest, by the end, I didn't really feel like it was saying anything. It felt completely devoid of anything interesting. I didn't recognize either of the directors for this episode, which is not a bad thing. If it introduces me to someone new that I end up liking, then great. The only notable thing is that one of them's called John Hancock, which is obviously a name that gets used a lot in American sayings for signatures. I'm scraping the barrel here as far as interesting things to bring up. So yeah, the first story is called If She Dies, and the first few minutes of this story are basically just to show us how much of a perfect, lovingly sweet relationship this dad character named Paul has with his daughter. She makes him a wallet for his birthday, she's tried to make him breakfast, and she's only like 8 or something like that, and he's floored by it. And she gives him a photograph in the wallet of like them with the mum who passed away a year prior, and it touches his heart, and she's, I miss mom, I wish I could come to work with you. But they're loving, they're happy, it's sickeningly sweet. So of course something bad has to happen, because otherwise why are you spending all this time making us care about the happiness of this pair? Basically he swerves to miss a cyclist on the road and crashes the car, smash cut, she's in hospital in a coma, and the doctor honestly is basically like, I realize you want some hope, but it might be time to give up that hope. Like, she's pretty much a goner. There's almost no chance she's ever waking up. But very, very blunt. But it's all about putting him in this place. It's once he leaves the hospital and he's very desolate that he starts to kind of, get into the Twilight Zone element of the story. Which is, and honestly, my favorite moment in the whole episode is probably this moment where he's getting into his car and he sees a young girl, not his daughter. I thought it might be at first, but you get a closer look at her in a minute and it's not her. Just standing on the roof of this building down the street. And I think I only liked it, to be honest, because it reminded me of It Follows, in the moment where one of the sort of spirity figures is standing on the roof. So I kind of like thinking of that. I guess. I mean, it's a nice, intriguing. It's a really weird place for someone to randomly be standing, which is what makes it effective. So I thought this part of the story was okay, as it was starting to introduce the supernatural element. But ultimately, he goes over and like speaks to this nun who's dealing with stuff out in front of this building. Turns out it's an orphanage that's been torn down, and the nuns and the kids have already moved to a new building that they've got. But she's just here getting rid of all the old stuff that was in the place, and she was selling it on the front yard kind of thing. And she tries to say, "Hey, maybe there's something you could buy," and he's like, "I'm not interested. I'm too busy, right? You know, I'm busy dealing with the fact that my daughter's dying, and I'm going to be alone and miserable and whatever." But then the ghost of the little girl shows up again when he's walking away and points to something under a tarp. And he comes over and looks at it, and I wasn't sure what this was going to be, but it turned out to be a child's bed. Not quite a crib. It was just a bit bigger than a crib, but it's a really sort of fancy mahogany, kind of carved, but certainly a bed it would be too small for anyone over a certain age, right? Honestly, it feels weird to build a bed like that. You might as well just have a regular sized bed for the kid to grow into. There's nothing wrong with having a bit extra foot room. But regardless, he feels compelled to buy this bed. And then later that night, he sees the girl ghost again in his apartment or his house, and she leads him through to the bed, and she goes into the bed, and she says she's looking for someone. I think the name was Robbie. Doesn't really matter what the name was, but she's looking for someone, and asks for him to tuck her in. And he just kind of goes along with all this. It's like he's in a daze, and he's kind of like feeling weird about the whole thing. But he goes back to the orphanage the next day, can't find anyone there, but he goes to the new orphanage and asks to speak to the nun who sold him the stuff and wants to talk. And they don't really want to entertain him until he starts saying that he saw a little girl who told him her name by this point and said her name was Sarah and that she's looking for this Robbie. And this freaks out the nun, and she's like, "How could you know about her? She died before you were even born." Turns out she died from tuberculosis. I cannot say the word. Just, you know what I'm trying to say. TB. But yeah, so this obviously gives her some pause, and it turns out what she was looking for was not a person, but it was a stuffed animal toy. It was this little teddy bear or whatever. And he asked to take it with him because he promised to get it back for her. And the nun's obviously hesitant, but says, what if the reason why, you know, God killed her? Because when the nun was going on about knowing this little girl, she's like, "Oh, sometimes it's really hard to see what God's plan is when he's doing something so cruel to a young child. It is very traumatic for her. She clearly has a lot of bad memories about this." But he's like, what if the reason why all this happened is so that her spirit could help now? Or something to that effect. So the end of the story is basically that he falls asleep next to the crib holding this teddy bear. Sorry. Actually, before that, he goes to the hospital and takes his daughter home. That's a really important part that I was missing out. Against doctor's orders, he just picks her up and leaves, basically like a kidnapping, except it's his own daughter. And takes her home, puts her in this old bed, falls asleep next to it holding the teddy bear, and then basically it magically heals her. Like, what little intrigue I had when he started seeing a ghost of some kind, that was, and I assumed, don't get me wrong, I knew the story was probably going to get to the point where the ghost of the spirits or whatever it was going to help heal his daughter. But honestly, I thought it would be something that would be set up better so that I understood the payoff. Instead, it just kind of feels like, okay, why did this bed magically heal her? Why did giving this little girl back her teddy bear help heal her? I mean, it's implied when she wakes up, because when the daughter wakes up, she asks for the teddy bear, implying that the spirit of the previous girl has merged with her or something, right? Where the spirit of this other girl gave her the will to fight out of the coma or something. I don't know. But really underwhelming by the end, sadly. Honestly, the only real thought I had going through my head, other than one or cool little moments of, not creepiness, but like, you know, weirdness because he's seen a ghost, was that the actor looked very familiar. And I have seen him in some stuff when I looked him up. He's in a variety of movies. But I thought he was the main actor from God Told Me To, which is a great weird movie from the 70s. It's not actually him. He just kind of looks like the guy. But it was making me think of him. And that's basically all I've got on the first story. Not a whole lot to say. I don't feel like the ending is really properly set up. It ends up being very abrupt. I kept thinking there was going to be more. They were going to introduce a couple of new elements so that when everything came together at the end, I'd be like, oh, that's why all these things came together, and now I understand what the point of the episode was. But by the end, I didn't really feel like it had anything to say, much like the second story, to be honest. But it had nothing to say. I didn't really understand why this worked at the end. It just felt like someone vomited out a few basic ideas, put them into a story, and called it a day without really trying to orchestrate it into a fully formed story where everything actually pays off something else or makes sense. So, did not like the first story that much. But because it had one or two visuals or little moments of atmosphere that I liked, I probably still liked it more than the second story, which is a shame, because that's more of the runtime of the episode. So, Ye Gods is about this yuppie who basically bumps into a woman when he's having lunch at a fancy place, and this man, who turns out to be Cupid in the next scene, I say next scene, I mean, he doesn't say his name until the next scene. I mean, I guess it's obvious in this scene, because he kind of like snaps his fingers or whatever, and makes a spark between them. But then he's frustrated because the yuppie basically just walks away from the woman without asking for her name or number. So even though he had a moment where they both smiled at each other, he didn't capitalize on it. And I thought, okay, this might have something to say. This is going to say about how we're too obsessed as a society, particularly in the 80s. Arguably, it's more of a problem now even, but like we're too obsessed with work that we don't. Some people don't give themselves enough time for love, particularly people who are obsessed with their jobs, of making lots of money, of having nice things. They don't have time to actually feel real feelings and pursue that part of their life, which is fine. I mean, I don't know if it's a widespread problem necessarily, but it's certainly something that some people have an issue with. Okay. But Cupid shows up to his office basically to complain to him that that should have worked. He should be in love, and there's something wrong with him as a person because he didn't like just go down the path of being romantic at that point, and it's something that's wrong with these yuppies. Although he keeps incorrectly calling them yuckies, which is a running joke, I guess, in the episode. It wasn't particularly amusing or funny, if I'm honest. But the whole thing here is as he's leaving, he fires, like, he basically just, like, makes a motion with his hand to fire a bow and arrow, and, like, it kind of cartoony appears and, like, fires a cartoon arrow at him, and he does it 3 times, and he basically says that I'm just kind of pissed at you, so hopefully all these arrows ruin your life. And effectively what all these arrows do is they make him absolutely lovesick and heartbroken about this woman that he ran into, that he doesn't even know the name of. So he becomes obsessed. He wants to know who she is. He keeps seeing visions of her at different times and places when he's out with a friend or whatever, and he can't get her out of his mind. But it's like an obsession, but it's an obsession connected to someone that he shouldn't have any feelings for, but he does. He has really intense feelings for because Cupid's done this to him. So the story then becomes him trying to fix it, which basically amounts to finding where Cupid is, which he finds through, was it Bacchus, the other god that's on Earth? Because that's one of the things that comes up when he first introduces himself, is that Cupid is one of the gods, and that all the gods are, it's very American gods, actually. The premise of this, not in the story, but just in the concept that all the gods are walking around doing stuff. But when he does track down Cupid at this party with Bacchus, we find out that he has now lost all of his powers because he is heartbroken because his girlfriend, Megira, who's a fury, has broken up with him. So then the plot becomes our main character trying to fix this, trying to put them back together. So stage 1 of that is getting like a little incantation or like spell off of Bacchus to summon Megira, which he does, and she shows up with a snake around her neck and is like, why did you summon me, you puny man? And he tries to bring up Cupid, and she just starts going on about how Cupid was falling for a mortal named Drusilla, which I'm just pausing because I'm a big fan of the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I can't hear the name Drusilla without thinking about it. But she, you know, basically says, not a chance, I hate his guts, you're lucky I'm not turning you into a toad or something like that. So then he calls Bacchus back and says, yeah, that whole incantation worked, I need another favor. So basically the big finale to this story is that he puts up like a sign on his door in his office that once a god is entered, they can't leave because of this sign. It's like a barrier spell, effectively. And he summons Megira again. He's somehow tricked. He's had Bacchus tell Cupid to come, so he's tricked him to come. He's basically trapped them both in the office, to try and reconcile the relationship. And all it really is Cupid says, you know what, I'll admit I was wrong and I'm sorry. And then immediately they both start staring at each other like they're in love again. And the main guy leaves the room, gives him some privacy. When he comes back into the room, they've actually gotten out the window, right? They went away with the window cleaner, even though they're gods. So I'm like, can they not just jump? I don't know. I don't know what the god rules are in this story. But that's it. They're back together, and the main character, whose name's Todd, he basically says, well, I guess I'm screwed just to be obsessed with this woman who I don't even know, and that's a bit unfair. I guess I'll just buy a nice car to try and make myself feel better. But the final scene of the episode is he gets bumped in the back of the car, right? And he's upset, he gets out, he's really angry, but it turns out the car behind him that hit him was being driven by this woman that he's been obsessed with throughout the episode, and they immediately start kissing, effectively, right? As Cupid and Megara drive by in a different vehicle and wave at them, they kiss, and that's the end of the story. It's like I said, at the start of the story, it felt like it might have something to say about someone who isn't pursuing that side of their life, and that by through having to help someone else's romance, like, learn something about himself. But I don't feel like the main character here learned anything about himself. It would actually have been more meaningful to me if at the end of the story he just kind of like took the leap of asking her name and maybe her number, or asking her out on a date, perhaps. The fact that they just look at each other and start kissing like they're already madly in love just makes the whole thing feel like a cartoon. This isn't a real relationship. He hasn't really overcome something. I mean, yeah, okay, he's realized that he wants more in life and that he wants to pursue something, but the idea that it's this woman that he just happened to bump into and Cupid like gave him some love juice for, it doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't really feel like it's got an impact on his character in a way that I think the stories should be aiming for, if it isn't actually aiming for. It just all falls flat for me. I don't feel anything from this change in the character. It's not like he actually has to make an effort to better himself. The magical gods just like give him this win because now they're happy. And I don't think that's saying anything. I don't think that's really saying anything about people, or even saying anything about gods, or worshipping a higher power. I genuinely don't think this says anything about anything. I felt completely empty at the end of the story. It gave me nothing. If you enjoy some actors hamming it up, if you enjoy the idea of Cupid being this drunk, lovesick fool, then maybe you'll get a little bit of amusement out of it. But for me, it didn't really carry anything. And the entire conceit of the story isn't all that funny to me, or the irony that someone's having to fix Cupid's love life isn't that funny to me. I think at a base level, if I was the one like getting pitched stories to for this show, and someone pitched me this, I wouldn't greenlight it. And like almost immediately, because you'd have to really sell me on what you're doing with it to make it work. Someone else on the board would have to like be the one to approve it, because it would not be tickling my fancy. So yeah, I really can't say much positive about that. I mean, I guess the one positive thing I can say is that they weren't torturous stories to watch. They're fairly easy to get through. I was maybe a little bit bored, but I wasn't like clawing at my skin like, oh my god, when's this going to end? It's light enough and trying to be amusing enough that it never feels too difficult to get through. It's at least an easy watch, if nothing else. But I couldn't recommend like either of these stories, and therefore not the episode. So yeah, a bit of a dud, which is a real shame, because last week's episode had like probably the best story that this version of Twilight Zone's had so far. Nightcrawlers from the last episode was fantastic. So it's a shame to not carry that momentum, and I mean, but this is the problem with anthologies, is that the quality is going to swing wildly. It's just a bummer when, in this case, we get two stories and I don't like either of them. So hopefully episode 6 will give us some better fruit to I wanted to say better fruit, but I started it weird, so I don't know how to end the sentence. Anyway, give us better fruit. I demand fruit. So thank you very much for joining me. You can support all the content and help keep all the reviews coming by going to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonuses for your trouble. But, otherwise, like, subscribe, all these things do help. I'm also just a couple episodes away from the end of the original Twilight Zone, episodes 33 of season 5, because there's an absurd number of episodes. It just went out the other day. So thank you very much for joining me. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.